Lucia Verisi came home early with sugar on her sleeves, rain in her hair, and a box of warm sfogliatelle in her hands, only to find her fiancé kissing her sister in the apartment where she had planned to become his wife. The key was still in the lock when she heard Valentina laugh from the bedroom. Not the polite laugh her sister used at family dinners, not the sharp little laugh she used when someone complimented Lucia's pastries before complimenting her dress. This laugh was soft, breathless, and familiar in a way it had no right to be. Lucia stood in the narrow hallway, still wearing her flour-dusted apron beneath her coat, one hand holding the pastry box, the other resting against the wall she had painted yellow last spring because Enzo said white looked too cold. The apartment smelled like his expensive cologne and her sister's jasmine perfume. 2 scents Lucia knew too well, twisted together in the air like a confession nobody had meant for her to hear. She did not move at first. That surprised her later. In stories, women screamed. Women dropped things. Women ran into rooms and demanded answers from people already too selfish to give honest ones. Lucia did none of that. She stood very still and listened to the quiet, messy sounds of betrayal happening behind a door she had bought with her own money. Her heart did not break loudly. It went silent. That silence scared her more than pain would have. Pain was hot. Pain cried and threw plates. Silence looked around the hallway and noticed details. Enzo's black coat hanging beside hers. Valentina's red scarf tossed over the chair. 2 wine glasses on the kitchen counter. The envelope from the caterer opened near the sink. Her wedding tasting notes, folded carefully beneath Enzo's phone as if even betrayal needed a place to rest. Lucia looked down at her left hand. The engagement ring caught the weak hallway light and flashed once, bright and useless. Enzo had chosen a diamond too small for Valentina's taste and too public for Lucia's. He had proposed in her pastry shop 6 months earlier, in front of customers, her mother, 3 aunties, 2 old men from the neighborhood, and a child with chocolate on his chin. Lucia had said yes, because she had believed love did not have to be cinematic to be real. She had believed a steady man with neat hair, polished shoes, and careful promises could be enough. She had believed her sister's smile that day was tight, because Valentina hated attention that was not hers. Now the bedroom door was half open, and Lucia understood that some smiles were not jealousy. Some were hunger waiting its turn. Enzo murmured something too low for Lucia to catch. Valentina answered with his name, not as a sister-in-law should say it, not as a guest in Lucia's home should say it, but as if she had been saying it for months, in places Lucia had not thought to look. The pastry box bent slightly beneath Lucia's fingers. One corner gave way, and a little dusting of powdered sugar slipped through the crack onto the floor. That was what finally made her breathe. She thought of the bakery, of the ovens cooling in the dark, of the dough she had folded before dawn, of old Signora Belli kissing her cheeks because the lemon cream reminded her of her dead husband, of children pressing noses to the glass, of tourists pointing badly at the menu and asking for whatever smelled like heaven. Lucia had built something warm with hands people called too soft, and a body people thought meant she lacked discipline. She had built a life out of butter, patience, early mornings, burns, rent, laughter, and recipes she carried like family prayers. Enzo had slept in her bed and eaten her food and asked her to make tiny almond cakes for the wedding guests, while bringing her sister into that same bed before the invitations had even gone out. Her face did not change. That was another thing that surprised her later. She placed the box of sfogliatelle on the little table beside the door. She removed the engagement ring slowly, because her finger was swollen from a day of kneading dough, and for one ugly second, the ring resisted, as if even it believed she should stay trapped by the promise it represented. Lucia twisted once. The ring came free. Her hand looked strange without it. Lighter. Older. Hers. There was a notepad near the table, one she used for grocery lists and delivery reminders. She tore off a small square. The pen shook only when she first touched it to the paper. Then her hand steadied. She wrote 2 words. I saw. Nothing more. Not a question. Not an accusation. Not a speech delivered to people who had already chosen selfishness over shame. She placed the note under the ring, set both beside the pastry box, and took one last look down the hallway. The bedroom door moved slightly. Valentina laughed again. Lucia turned and left before either of them knew they had already lost her. The rain had grown heavier by the time she reached the street. Rome blurred under it, all gold windows and black umbrellas, and wet stone shining beneath the streetlights. Lucia pulled her coat tight across her chest and walked without thinking. Her shoes slapped through puddles. Her apron was still tied around her waist. Flour clung to the dark wool of her sleeves. A woman carrying designer shopping bags looked at her, then quickly looked away with the soft embarrassment people wore when they saw someone unraveling in public. Lucia almost laughed. She was not unraveling. That was the strange part. Something inside her had snapped cleanly. The cut was deep, but neat. She did not go back to the pastry shop at first. Her feet carried her 3 blocks past it before she stopped under the striped awning of a closed flower stall and realized the windows of Dolce Stella were still glowing behind her. Her little shop sat on a corner street near Trastevere, painted cream and pale green, with copper lamps in the windows and a blue sign her father had carved before his hands began to shake. During the day, the shop smelled like espresso, orange zest, warm bread, and sugar turning golden at the edges. At night, after the customers left and the ovens rested, it smelled like work. Honest work. The kind that stayed under your nails and in your shoulders. Lucia stood in the rain and stared at it as if it were a person waiting for her to decide whether she could still be loved. Her phone began buzzing in her coat pocket. She knew it would be Enzo before she looked, then Valentina, then Enzo again, then her mother, probably because Valentina had already begun crying into the family network, spinning herself into the victim, before Lucia had even reached dry ground. Lucia silenced the phone without reading the messages. Her thumb hovered over Enzo's name for a second too long. Not because she wanted him, because some foolish, tired part of her wanted the man she had imagined him to be to call and explain that the world had made a mistake. But the man in the bedroom had not been a mistake. He had been the truth with his shirt unbuttoned. She unlocked the pastry shop and stepped into the dark. The little bell over the door gave its bright, familiar sound, cheerful enough to feel rude. Lucia turned on only the kitchen lights. Silver counters gleamed. Mixing bowls sat upside down to dry. Racks of biscotti cooled near the wall. The display cases were empty except for one tray of imperfect cannoli shells she had planned to fill in the morning. She went straight to the sink, washed her hands, and watched water turn cloudy with flour. For the first time since leaving the apartment, tears burned behind her eyes. She held them there. She did not mind crying. She minded doing it for Enzo. The office was hardly an office. It was a small room behind the kitchen with a desk, a filing cabinet, 2 shelves of receipt boxes, and a framed photograph of Lucia, at 23, standing beside her father on opening week, both of them exhausted and proud. She sat in the chair and finally opened her phone. 42 missed calls, 12 messages. Enzo's first message said, "Lucia, where are you?" His second said, "Please answer." His third said, "This is not what you think." Lucia stared at that one. She nearly smiled. Men loved that sentence, as if women's eyes were unreliable, as if betrayal required interpretation, as if nakedness had footnotes. Valentina's messages were worse. "Lou, please, I can explain." Then, "You don't understand." Then, "Don't do something dramatic." That one made Lucia laugh out loud, a short sound that startled her in the tiny office. Dramatic. She had left a ring and a note. Valentina had slept with her sister's fiancé under a framed photograph of their grandmother, but Lucia, of course, was the dramatic one. She powered off the phone and placed it face down on the desk. That was when she noticed the filing cabinet drawer sitting slightly open. Lucia frowned. She always closed it. Always. The cabinet was old and stubborn, and if it was left open, the metal corner caught her hip when she squeezed past the desk. She pulled it wider. The folders inside looked normal at first. Tax documents, vendor contracts, catering receipts, staff payroll. She reached for the folder marked wedding invoices because anger, like grief, sometimes needed something practical to hold. The folder was too thick. Lucia opened it and found 3 envelopes that did not belong to her. They were cream-colored, expensive, and sealed with no names on the front. One had already been torn open. Inside were folded pages covered in numbers, initials, payment routes, company names, dates, and strange little codes written in neat black ink. Lucia was good with numbers. She had to be. Butter prices rose, rent shifted, suppliers lied, brides changed orders and pretended they had not. She knew the rhythm of real accounts. These were not bakery accounts. There were too many transfers, too many shell names, too many payments listed under catering events that had never happened. One line used the name of her shop, Dolce Stella. Beside it was an amount so large Lucia read it 3 times before her stomach turned cold. She pulled out another page, then another. The name Rosati appeared twice. Enzo's name. Valentina's initials appeared once beside a date from 2 weeks earlier, the same day she had come by the shop, claiming she wanted to help choose ribbon colors for the wedding favors. Lucia remembered Valentina standing in this office, touching everything with her glossy nails, complimenting the shelves, asking where Lucia kept old invoices. Lucia had laughed and told her not to become boring. Valentina had smiled. The room seemed to tilt. Lucia gripped the edge of the desk. Betrayal had just widened its mouth. This was not only sex. This was not only humiliation. Enzo and Valentina had used her shop, her father's shop, her name, her safe place. They had hidden something here because nobody looked too closely at a fat woman in a flowery apron who smiled at children and called old men sweetheart when they forgot their wallets. Nobody imagined warmth could notice. Nobody imagined softness could count. A sound came from the alley behind the shop. Lucia froze. It was not loud, just a scrape, then the low murmur of a man's voice. The back door was locked. She knew it was locked, because she had checked it before leaving for the apartment. Still, her eyes moved toward the kitchen. There was another scrape. Metal against metal. Someone was at the rear entrance. Her first thought was Enzo. Her second was worse. Enzo would call. Enzo would plead. Enzo would appear with wet hair and wounded eyes, trying to wrap lies in apology. Whoever stood behind the back door was not pleading. Lucia gathered the pages with shaking hands and shoved them into the empty pastry box from the counter. Then she stopped, pulled out a stack of cannoli shells, wrapped them quickly in paper, and placed them on top of the documents. Her mind had gone strangely sharp. If someone searched her bag, papers looked like papers. Pastries looked like Lucia being Lucia. She tucked the box under one arm, grabbed her emergency cash from the coffee tin, took her small suitcase from the storage closet because she had once packed it for a supplier trip and never unpacked the spare clothes, and moved toward the front door. The back lock clicked. Lucia did not wait to see who opened it. She slipped through the front entrance, locked it behind her with fingers that almost failed her, and stepped into the rain. She walked first. Running drew eyes. Running made people ask why. She walked past the closed flower stall, past the corner pharmacy, past the church where old women lit candles for sons who never called, and only when she turned onto a wider street did she let herself move faster. Her phone was off. Her apartment was gone. Her shop was no longer safe. Her sister had betrayed her. Her fiancé had used her. Someone had come looking for whatever sat beneath the cannoli in the box pressed against her ribs. Lucia Verisi, who had started the evening planning to eat pastries with a man she thought she might marry, was now walking toward Roma Termini with a suitcase, wet shoes, €600, and criminal records disguised as dessert. By the time she reached the station, the rain had made a disaster of her hair. It curled around her face in wild, dark spirals. Her coat clung to her arms. The pastry box was softening at the edges. Termini roared around her with late trains, rolling suitcases, tired families, students, tourists, soldiers, vendors, announcements echoing overhead, and the smell of coffee fighting bravely against wet wool and diesel. Lucia stood beneath the departure board and realized she had no idea where to go. Naples was too close to family, Florence too obvious, Milan too expensive. Somewhere small, maybe. Somewhere nobody knew her name. Somewhere she could think before the world decided what kind of woman she was allowed to be. Her stomach twisted. Not hunger, not fear exactly, something between them. She moved toward a ticket machine, then stopped when she saw two men near the entrance scanning the crowd. They wore dark jackets, no luggage, and the kind of stillness that did not belong in a train station. One of them held a phone near his chest. The other turned slowly, looking not at signs or platforms but at faces. Lucia lowered her head. Her heart began to pound. She changed direction too quickly and slammed straight into a wall that smelled like cedar, expensive wool, and danger. The pastry box flew from her arms. Cannoli shells burst across the polished floor like tiny broken bones. Powdered sugar scattered over black leather shoes that probably cost more than her oven. Lucia stumbled backward, suitcase twisting behind her, and looked up, ready to apologize because manners were deep in her bones, even when panic was eating her alive. Then she saw the man. He was tall, not politely tall, impossibly, inconveniently tall. Broad shoulders, dark hair brushed back from a face so sharp it looked carved by someone with no interest in mercy. His suit was black, flawless, and dry, despite the storm outside. Two men stood a few paces behind him, both watching the station with quiet alertness. People moved around him without touching him, the way water moved around stone. He looked down at the ruined pastries, then at Lucia, with the calm expression of a man who had never once been asked to care about inconvenience. Something inside her, already bruised by the evening, caught fire. "Are you serious?" she said. The man blinked once. Lucia pointed at the destroyed cannoli shells. "Do you have any idea how long those take to make?" His gaze moved from her face to the pastries again. "You walked into me. I was walking in a public train station. You were standing there like a funeral statue with cheekbones." One of the men behind him made a sound that could have been a cough or the beginning of laughter. The tall man did not turn. His eyes stayed on Lucia, and for the first time something changed in them. Not anger, interest. "A funeral statue," he repeated. "Yes, expensive, unhelpful, in the way." His mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile. "Most people step around me. Most people probably have time to admire the warning signs." His gaze dropped to the pastry box, now bent open on the floor. A few wrapped shells remained inside. Beneath them, Lucia saw the edge of one cream-colored envelope. Her anger vanished so quickly she almost swayed. She stepped forward, but the man noticed the movement. His eyes sharpened. Lucia crouched and began gathering broken pastries with more speed than dignity. "Never mind. Fine. It's fine." The cannoli died bravely. He crouched too. That startled her enough that she nearly dropped the box again. Men in suits like his did not crouch on station floors. Men with guards behind them did not pick up pastry fragments. But he reached for one of the broken shells, studied it briefly, and placed it into the box with surprising care. "How much were they worth?" he asked. Lucia snatched the box closer. "Emotionally or financially? Both. Financially, 18 euros. Emotionally, after the night I have had, somewhere near priceless. Then I owe you priceless. She looked at him. It was the wrong moment to notice his voice. Low, smooth and controlled, with an edge under it that made the simple sentence feel like a door opening into a darker room. He did not sound like a man flirting. He sounded like a man who could make a promise and have the city rearrange itself to keep it. Lucia stood. You can owe me 18 euros and an apology. Behind him, the second guard actually looked away, his shoulders shaking once. The man rose slowly. Do you know who I am? No, and unless you are the patron saint of ruined pastries, I do not care. For one still second, nobody moved. The station seemed loud everywhere except inside the small circle around them. The man looked at her as if she had handed him something rare, not respect, not fear, not obedience. A scolding, delivered with rain in her curls and sugar on her sleeve. Then he reached into his jacket and removed a slim black wallet. What is your name? Lucia narrowed her eyes. Why? So I know who I am apologizing to. You can apologize to the cannoli. They suffered most. This time his mouth did curve. Barely, but enough. I am sorry for the cannoli. It was absurd. It was also, somehow, the first honest sentence anyone had said to her all night. Lucia almost laughed. The sound rose in her throat, tired and wild. But before it escaped, the two men from the entrance stepped closer into view. One of them looked straight at her pastry box. The other lifted his phone. The tall man saw her face change. Every trace of amusement left him. Lucia took one step back. The station announcement cracked overhead, swallowing a few seconds in static and Italian place names. People rushed between platforms. A child cried. A woman cursed at a suitcase wheel. The world kept moving, but the man in front of Lucia had become completely still. Are they with you? He asked. No, Lucia whispered. The men from the entrance began walking toward them. The tall man shifted, just slightly, placing his body between Lucia and their line of sight. It was not dramatic. It was not a question. It was the natural movement of someone used to danger, choosing where danger would have to pass. Lucia looked up at him. Who are you? His eyes did not leave the approaching men. Tommaso Silvestri, he said. The name moved through the air like a match struck in a dark room. Lucia did not know much about Rome's criminal families. She knew enough. Everyone knew enough. Tommaso Silvestri was not a man women argued with over cannoli. He was not a man people bumped into and survived by being charming. He was the whispered name behind closed restaurants, the shadow in stories old men lowered their voices to tell, the reason certain streets stayed quiet after midnight. Lucia's fingers tightened around the ruined pastry box. Tommaso glanced down at her then, and somehow, even with danger walking toward them, he looked amused again. You should have cared a little, he said. Lucia stared at him, rain dripping from her hair onto her collar. About what? When I asked if you knew who I was. The two men were closer now. One reached beneath his jacket. Tommaso's guards moved at once. Lucia's breath caught. Tommaso did not touch her. He did not grab her arm or shove her behind him. He simply opened his hand beside her, palm up, offering without forcing. Lucia, he said, though she had not told him her name, and that alone sent a chill through her. Maybe he had seen it on the pastry box. Maybe powerful men knew how to read the world faster than ordinary people. If you want to keep standing here, you may. If you want to live long enough to tell me why Calabrese men are hunting a pastry chef, come with me. Lucia looked at his hand, then at the men. Then at the box hiding the papers that had turned her life into something sharp and moving. She placed her hand in his. Fine, she said, her voice shaking only a little. But you still owe me 18 euros. Tommaso's fingers closed gently around hers. And for the first time that night, Lucia ran toward danger, because it was the only thing standing between her and something worse. Tommaso pulled Lucia through the crowd without dragging her, and that was the first thing she noticed, even while fear beat hard under her ribs. His hand was firm around hers, warm and steady, but he did not crush her fingers or force her to stumble behind him. He moved like the station belonged to him, like every rushing tourist, every tired family, every guard near the platform had already been arranged by some silent order only he could hear. Lucia clutched the ruined pastry box against her chest with her free arm, her suitcase bouncing badly behind her, while voices rose around them, and the two men from the entrance tried to follow. One of Tommaso's guards stepped into their path with a calm smile that did not reach his eyes. The other guard moved behind Lucia and Tommaso, blocking the view of anyone who might be watching too closely. Lucia wanted to ask where they were going. She wanted to ask how he knew those men were Calabrese. She wanted to ask whether she had just traded one danger for another. Instead, she ran, because the sound of footsteps behind her answered every question with the same cold word: faster. They reached a side exit near a closed newspaper stand. Rain slapped the pavement beyond the glass doors. A black car waited at the curb with its engine running and its back door already open. Of course it did. Men like Tommaso Silvestri did not search for taxis in the rain. They appeared beside cars that looked as if they had been built for secrets. Lucia stopped before getting in. It was foolish. She knew it was foolish because Calabrese men were somewhere behind her, and she was carrying papers she did not understand, and the most feared man in Rome was still holding her hand like he had decided, without asking the world, that she would survive the night. But she stopped anyway. Tommaso turned to her, rain darkening the shoulders of his suit. "I am not getting into a stranger's car without knowing where it is going," she said. His eyes flicked toward the station doors. "You were ready to board a train without knowing where it was going. That train had witnesses. So does this street? This street is pretending not to look at you." Something like amusement warmed his face for less than a second. Then the station doors behind them opened. Tommaso's voice lowered. "My house. You will be safe there until we understand what you have." Lucia looked at the car, then at him. "And if I say no?" He released her hand immediately. The absence of his fingers startled her more than his touch had. "Then I put 2 men behind you at a distance. Make sure Calabrese does not reach you tonight, and you go wherever you choose." Lucia stared at him. She had expected command. She had expected threat. She had expected the kind of protection that felt exactly like a cage but had better furniture. She had not expected choice. Behind him, one of the Calabrese men appeared at the exit, saw Tommaso, and froze like a man who had opened the wrong door in hell. Lucia swallowed. "Your house," she said, "but if you murder me, I will haunt you and your expensive shoes." Tommaso opened the car door wider. "Fair." The car moved through Rome like a shadow sliding beneath the rain. Lucia sat in the back seat with Tommaso beside her and the pastry box on her lap. She watched the city blur past the tinted windows, all wet stone, gold lamps, narrow streets, old churches, and closed cafes with chairs stacked like tired dancers. Her whole life sat behind her somewhere in the dark. The apartment, the shop, the bed where Enzo and Valentina had ruined the air. She had not cried. She wondered if that meant she was strong or simply too shocked to feel everything at once. Tommaso did not speak for several minutes. He made one call, only a few words in Italian, so low she caught almost none of it, except 2 names. Calabrese, Rosati. Then he ended the call and looked at the box in her lap. "What is inside?" "Dead cannoli and maybe the reason I am having the worst night of my life." "Only maybe? I saw my fiancé with my sister 2 hours ago, so the competition is strong." Tommaso went still, not loudly, no dramatic movement. Just a sudden quietness in his face, as if some part of him had stepped closer to a locked room. "He betrayed you." "Yes, with your sister. You heard that part correctly." His jaw tightened, and Lucia did not understand why that small sign of anger made something in her chest loosen. Enzo had betrayed her and then called her 42 times because he wanted to manage the mess. Tommaso had known her for less than 20 minutes and looked as if the fact of it offended him personally. "What is his name?" he asked. "Enzo Rosati." The driver's eyes shifted to the mirror. Tommaso saw it. Lucia saw Tommaso see it. "You know him," she said. "I know of him." "That sounds worse." "It usually is." Tommaso's house did not look like a house. It looked like an old Roman palazzo that had grown tired of pretending it was not a fortress. Tall iron gates opened before the car stopped. Stone lions watched from either side of the entrance. The windows glowed softly behind thick glass. Cameras sat hidden among climbing ivy. Men in dark coats stood under the portico, not moving, not talking, their eyes cutting through the rain as the car pulled in. Lucia stepped out with her pastry box and suitcase, and for the first time that night, the absurdity of herself hit her fully. She was a fat pastry chef in wet shoes, flour on her sleeves, carrying ruined dessert into the home of a Mafia boss. Somewhere, her grandmother was either praying hard or laughing so hard heaven had to ask her to quiet down. Tommaso led her inside. The entry hall was wide and quiet, with marble floors, old paintings, and a staircase that curved upward like it had secrets to keep. Everything smelled faintly of leather, wood polish, and orange peel. Lucia hated that she noticed the orange peel. She hated more that it made the place feel less cold. A woman in her 60s appeared from a side hall wearing a black dress, soft slippers, and an expression that suggested she had seen every kind of emergency and found most of them poorly organized. "This is Lucia Verisi," Tommaso said. "She needs dry clothes, tea, and privacy. And food," Lucia added before she could stop herself. The woman looked at her. Tommaso looked at her. Lucia lifted the damaged box slightly. "I had a bad night and lost most of my cannoli in a collision with a funeral statue." The woman's mouth twitched. Tommaso closed his eyes for a second, as if asking some patient saint for strength. "This is Agata," he said. "She runs the house." "I do not run the house," Agata said. "I keep it from becoming a museum with guns." Lucia liked her immediately. Agata brought her to a guest room that was larger than Lucia's entire apartment and found her a soft black sweater, loose trousers, socks, and a robe that smelled faintly of lavender. Lucia showered quickly, refusing to look too long at her own face in the mirror. When she came out, her phone was still off, her hair was damp around her shoulders, and the pastry box sat on a low table beside a tray of tea, bread, cheese, figs, and honey. Tommaso was waiting near the window, turned partly away, as if giving the room permission not to feel watched. He had changed into a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. Somehow that felt more dangerous than the suit. Lucia sat down and opened the box. She lifted the paper from the top and revealed the envelopes underneath. Tommaso came closer. His face changed when he saw the first page. He did not look surprised exactly. He looked as if a suspicion had taken physical form. "Where did you get these?" "My office. Hidden in my wedding invoice folder. Romantic, no?" He picked up one page carefully. His eyes moved fast over the numbers. "This is Calabrese money. I was hoping you would say it was a very boring tax problem." "No, of course not." He laid the page on the table. "Your fiancé and your sister used your shop as a cover for payments between Calabrese companies. Some of these names belong to men inside his family, men who are not supposed to be dealing with Calabrese." Lucia stared at him. "Inside whose family?" "Mine." The room seemed to grow colder. Lucia wrapped the robe tighter around herself. "So this is not only about Enzo." "No. And not only about Valentina." "No. And not only about my shop." Tommaso looked at her, and for the first time since the station, she saw something like regret. "No." Lucia leaned back against the sofa. Her throat felt tight. "I made cakes for their birthdays. I made Valentina's favorite pistachio cream every Easter, even though she always said it was too sweet. Enzo used to sit in my kitchen and tell me I worked too hard. He would rub my shoulders and ask about the day, and all the time he was hiding criminal records behind my invoices. Her voice did not crack until the last word. She hated that. Tommaso did not reach for her. He did not tell her to calm down. He simply sat across from her and waited. That waiting was worse somehow. Kinder. Lucia wiped under one eye with the sleeve of a borrowed sweater. Do not look at me like I am fragile. I was looking at you like you are angry. Good. You should be. She laughed once, small and bitter. Wonderful. The Mafia boss approves my emotional processing. His mouth moved. Only the accurate parts. They worked until dawn. Tommaso called in men with laptops, men with quiet voices, men who looked at Lucia first with curiosity, and then, after she corrected 3 payment dates and identified 2 fake catering events from memory, with respect. She knew weddings, galas, charity lunches, engagement parties, family dinners, private anniversaries, and the women who ordered pastries for them. She knew who tipped badly, who argued about invoices, who changed guest counts to hide mistresses, who paid in cash, who sent drivers instead of assistants, who hated almonds, who claimed allergies to avoid eating poor people's food. Tommaso's men had maps, wire routes, and criminal names. Lucia had gossip wrapped in sugar. Together, the mess began to form a pattern. The Calabrese family had been moving money through social events and small vendors nobody expected to audit too closely. Enzo had been one of the handlers. Valentina had collected names from Lucia's client list, and someone inside the Silvestri circle had been feeding them safe passage. By sunrise, Tommaso stood over the table, with his hands braced on the edge, looking at the documents like they had insulted his bloodline. Lucia sat beside a half-eaten piece of bread, eyes burning from lack of sleep. I want my shop back, she said. You will have it. I want Enzo ruined. That can be arranged. I want Valentina to understand. I was not stupid. Tommaso looked at her. You were betrayed. That is not the same thing. The words landed quietly. Lucia looked away, before they could do too much damage. By noon, the story had already begun spreading. Enzo Rosati was searching for his missing fiancé. Valentina was crying to their mother. Men had been seen near Dolce Stella in the early morning. The back door lock was broken. Nothing had been stolen except the office computer and 2 receipt boxes, which meant whoever had come for the envelopes had arrived too late and knew it. Lucia stood in Tommaso's library while Agata pinned her damp hair back and muttered that foolish men were proof God had a sense of humor. Tommaso entered with a phone in one hand. Enzo wants to meet you. Lucia laughed. No. Good. Do not sound so proud. I am still furious. Even better. She turned to him. I am not hiding here while you handle this. That was not what I was going to suggest. Your face was absolutely going to suggest it. He put the phone away. My face is difficult to read. For scared men, maybe. Agata coughed softly and left the room. Tommaso studied her for a long moment. Calabrese expects fear. Enzo expects heartbreak. Valentina expects shame. You can use all 3 against them. Lucia folded her arms. Meaning? Meaning the bold pastry chef who scolded me in Termini will now be seen under my protection. Under your protection sounds very medieval. It is effective. It sounds like I belong to you. His expression changed. You do not. The answer came too fast to be polite. Lucia felt it in her chest, the quick heat of something she had no time to name. Then say it differently. Tommaso held her eyes. Stand beside me. Let them wonder why. Lucia should have refused because standing beside him meant entering a world with knives hidden under tablecloths and smiles sharper than glass. But the alternative was sitting alone while Enzo and Valentina decided the shape of her story. She had done that long enough. Fine, she said, but I choose my own dress. Of course, and I talk. I assumed you would. And if anyone calls me your weakness, I get to correct them. Tommaso's gaze moved over her face, not over her body like men often did when they thought she should be grateful for attention, but over her expression, her anger, her humor, her stubborn little lift of chin. "Lucia," he said quietly, "I am counting on it." 3 nights later, she walked into a charity gala on Tommaso Silvestri's arm, wearing a deep blue dress that showed her shoulders, her curves, and every bit of confidence Valentina had spent years trying to soften. The room noticed. Of course it noticed. Rich rooms loved pretending they were above gossip while feeding on it like cake. Whispers moved from table to table before Lucia had crossed the marble floor. Tommaso did not introduce her as a guest, or a friend, or a rescued woman. He simply said her name and watched people decide how carefully they needed to speak. Lucia smiled at brides she had served, mothers who had ordered baptism cakes, old men who had flirted with her over espresso, and wives who remembered everything their husbands forgot. Within 20 minutes, she knew more than Tommaso's men had learned in 2 days. Valentina had been invited. Enzo had arrived with her. Calabrese men were near the west balcony, and one of Tommaso's older captains, a silver-haired man named Dario, avoided her eyes each time the Rosati name was mentioned. Tommaso leaned close enough for his voice to touch only her. "You saw something?" Lucia accepted champagne from a waiter and did not drink it. "Your man Dario sweats when he lies." "Dario has served my family for 20 years. Then he has had 20 years to practice and still did badly." Tommaso looked toward Dario, then back at her. "You are sure?" "I spent 12 years watching women pretend they liked cakes they planned to complain about later. Yes, I am sure." That almost smile returned. "Remind me never to disappoint you." Lucia looked at him over the rim of the glass. "Too late. You still owe me 18 euros. The trap almost worked perfectly." Almost. Lucia moved through the gala like she belonged there, laughing at the right jokes, accepting fake sympathy about the broken engagement, letting people underestimate her because it was easier than teaching all of Rome intelligence could wear lipstick and a larger dress size. Enzo approached her near the dessert table with wounded eyes and a face arranged for forgiveness. "Lucia," he said softly, "can we speak?" She looked at him, really looked. He was still handsome in the careful way she had once mistaken for steadiness, but the shine had gone from him. Or maybe she had stopped polishing it with hope. "You can apologize to the tiramisu," she said. "It has been listening longer than I have." His mouth tightened. "Please, I made a mistake." "No, Enzo, you made a schedule." He flinched. That pleased her more than it should have. Valentina appeared behind him in silver silk, beautiful, pale, and furious at not being the center of the wound she had created. "Lu, do not embarrass yourself." Lucia turned slowly. "My name sounds strange in your mouth tonight." Valentina's eyes flicked toward Tommaso across the room. Jealousy, fear, calculation. All of it ugly. "You think he cares about you?" she whispered. "Men like that use women. You would know." Valentina's slap would have landed if Lucia had not caught her wrist. The whole room seemed to breathe in. Lucia held her sister's hand in the air between them, not tightly. "Just enough. Do not mistake my softness for permission," she said. Valentina's eyes filled with tears so quickly it was almost impressive. Enzo stepped in, reaching for Lucia's arm, and Tommaso was suddenly there. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He only looked at Enzo's hand until Enzo pulled it back. "We are leaving," Tommaso said. Lucia frowned. "Now?" His eyes were cold. "Now." She understood 1 second too late. The room had shifted. Dario was gone. The west balcony doors stood open. One of Tommaso's guards was not at his post. Lucia's stomach dropped. Enzo saw her understand and smiled, just barely. The lights went out. Hands grabbed Lucia from behind. A cloth pressed near her mouth. She twisted hard, drove her heel down into someone's foot, and heard a man curse. She tried to shout Tommaso's name. but the music rose suddenly, too loud, swallowing the first sound. Then a sharp voice hissed in her ear, "Quiet, pastry girl." Fear opened inside her like cold water, but beneath it, anger stayed awake. They dragged her through a service corridor, out a side door, and into the back of a van that smelled like leather and smoke. Lucia's head struck the wall when the vehicle lurched forward. For a moment, the world blurred. When it steadied, Valentina sat across from her, face wet with tears she had no right to cry. "I told them not to hurt you," she whispered. Lucia breathed hard through her nose. Her hands were tied in front of her. "That must have been very generous of you." Valentina looked away. "You do not understand what Enzo promised me." Lucia laughed, but it came out broken. "A man who lies in his fiancé's bed does not become honest in yours." They took her to an old villa outside the city, one of those sleeping houses with shuttered windows and gardens gone wild in the dark. Inside, men waited around a dining table covered with phones, money, and Lucia's stolen receipt boxes. A Calabrese underboss named Marco Belandi sat at the head of the table with a glass of red wine and a smile that treated cruelty as conversation. Enzo stood near the fireplace, pale, but trying to look in control. Dario was there too, eyes avoiding hers. Lucia understood then that Tommaso's enemy was not only outside his walls. Some betrayal had been eating from the inside. Belandi looked her up and down and smiled wider. "This is the woman who has Silvestri distracted." A few men laughed. Enzo did not. Valentina did. Softly, nervously, as if laughter might keep her from becoming the next sacrifice. Belandi rose and came closer. "I expected someone different." Lucia lifted her chin. "Taller?" His smile thinned. "Quieter." "That must happen to you often." The room stilled. Belandi studied her. "Do you think jokes will save you?" "No, but they are free, and apparently everyone here is obsessed with money." Enzo stepped forward. "Lucia, stop. Just give them the files. You hid them in my shop. I was protecting you." She stared at him. Even tied, scared, and surrounded by men with guns, the lie made her tired more than afraid. "You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you want it to mean." Belandi leaned against the table. "Where are the originals?" Lucia's pulse hammered. She did not have the originals. Tommaso's people had copied them, but Belandi did not know how much they had. She took a slow breath and thought of dough. That was what she did when panic rose. Bread did not care if your hands shook at first. It only cared whether you kept working. "Do you mean the files Enzo forgot to remove, the ones Valentina photographed badly, or the ones Dario tried to move through a fake catering bill for the Marchini wedding?" Dario's head snapped up. Belandi looked at him. Lucia smiled. "Oh, was that a secret?" She kept talking because talking was time, and time was the only weapon she had. She named events. She named brides. She named fake dessert orders and delivery windows. Some of it she knew. Some of it she guessed. Some of it she invented with enough confidence to make guilty men check each other's faces. Enzo began sweating. Valentina began crying for real. Dario told Belandi she was lying, but his voice cracked. Lucia saw it. So did everyone else. Belandi struck the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. "Enough." He grabbed Lucia's chin, and cold fear moved through her at last. "Silvestri will come for you. Men like him always come for what they think belongs to them." Lucia met his eyes even while her stomach twisted. "Then you still do not understand your problem." "And what is my problem?" "I do not belong to him. I chose to stand beside him. There is a difference." A sound came from outside. Not loud, just a dull crack in the night, then another. The men in the room reached for weapons. Belandi's hand dropped from Lucia's face. Enzo whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Lucia closed her eyes for half a second. She should have felt relief. Instead, fear deepened, because she had seen Tommaso's restraint, and his silence, and the gentle way he had released her hand outside the car. Now, she was about to see the other part of him, the part Rome whispered about. The part men like Belandi had spent years trying to outrun. The front doors opened. Tommaso entered without rushing. His shirt was dark, his coat wet from rain, and his face held no expression at all. That was what made him terrifying. Not rage, not shouting, the absence of waste. His men moved behind him with controlled precision. 2 Calabrese guards were already on their knees in the hall. Dario lifted his gun, but one of Tommaso's guards reached him first. Enzo backed toward the fireplace. Valentina covered her mouth. Belandi grabbed Lucia and pulled her in front of him. Tommaso stopped. For one breath, his eyes went to Lucia's tied hands, then her face. Something moved through him, fierce and private, but when he spoke, his voice was quiet. "Let her go." Belandi laughed. "So she is your weakness." Tommaso looked at Lucia then, and the world around them seemed to narrow. She saw the answer in his face before he said it. "No," he said. "She is the reason I am giving you one chance to live through this conversation." It ended quickly after that. Not cleanly, not gently, but without the ugly chaos Lucia had feared. Tommaso's men moved with the cold discipline of people who had planned every step. Belandi tried to bargain. Dario tried to run. Enzo tried to point at Valentina and call her the one who had pushed him into everything. Valentina screamed that Enzo had promised her money, freedom, a life brighter than Lucia's little shop. Lucia listened from a chair while Agata, who had apparently arrived with a medical bag and the calm of a saint tired of nonsense, cut the ties from her wrists. "Are you hurt?" Agata asked. Lucia looked at the red marks on her skin, mostly insulted. Agata nodded. "Good. That heals faster." Tommaso did not come to Lucia immediately. He gave orders first. Evidence collected, phones taken, men separated, Dario restrained, Belandi alive, Enzo alive, though badly shaken, Valentina crying into her hands. Lucia watched him and understood something important. His power was real. It was not romantic smoke or danger boy theater. It could ruin lives, end alliances, erase names from rooms, and because it was real, the way he had held himself back with her mattered more. A gentle man with no power was easy. A powerful man who chose gentleness with care, with intention, with effort, was something else entirely. When they were finally alone in a side room of the villa, Lucia stood before he could speak. Her knees were unsteady, but she stood anyway. "Do not lock me away after this." Tommaso paused. Rain tapped against the shutters. "Lucia." "No. Listen, I know what you are thinking. You are thinking I was taken because I was visible, because I stood beside you, because I talked, because I refused to hide. And some part of you wants to put me somewhere safe and call it love." His face gave nothing away, which meant she was right. Her voice softened, but it did not weaken. "I will not be another beautiful thing kept behind your walls. I will not be a problem you solve by removing me from my own life. I have lost enough rooms already." Tommaso looked down at her wrists, then back to her eyes. "I was afraid." The honesty was so quiet it nearly undid her. "I know. When the lights went out, I thought I had lost you before I had the right to ask you to stay." Lucia's throat tightened. "Then ask better. Do not command. Do not decide. Ask." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he took one step closer and stopped before touching her. "Stay beside me," he said. "Not behind me, not hidden. Beside me. But only if that is what you want." Lucia looked at him, this dangerous man with rain on his coat, and fear finally showing where pride had been, and felt her heart move in a direction that should have scared her more than it did. "We finish this first," she said. His mouth curved slightly. "Of course. And you pay me 18 euros. Lucia. Plus emotional damages." This time he laughed softly. It changed his whole face. She wished it did not matter. It did. The final trap was Lucia's idea. Enzo and Valentina knew greed better than loyalty, and Lucia knew both of them better than they had ever known her. So she let them believe there was one final set of files, a ledger hidden in the walls of Dolce Stella, something her father had once built into the office without telling anyone. Enzo believed it because he had always believed Lucia sentimental enough to hide important things in places with meaning. Valentina believed it because she could not stand the thought of Lucia having one last secret. Tommaso let the rumor move through the correct channels. Belandi, facing exposure, tried to trade Dario and the Calabrese roots for mercy inside the underworld. Men who had smiled together over wine began accusing one another in locked rooms. By the time Enzo and Valentina broke into Dolce Stella 3 nights later, Tommaso's people were waiting, but not inside the shop. Lucia was. The shop was dark except for the kitchen lights. Lucia stood behind the counter in her apron, hair tied back, hands dusted with flour. A tray of fresh cannoli shells cooled beside her, because if her enemies were going to be arrested in her bakery, the bakery was at least going to smell correct. Enzo entered first through the back door. Valentina followed, whispering that this was a mistake. Lucia looked up from the counter. "It is," she said. They both froze. Enzo's face twisted. "Lucia, move." "No." Valentina's eyes darted around. "Where is Silvestri? You are still asking where the man is." "That has always been your problem." Lucia picked up a folded sheet of paper and placed it on the counter. "The ledgers are gone. The copies are already with every person Calabrese betrayed and every Silvestri captain Dario lied to. By morning, nobody will trust any of you enough to share a cigarette." Enzo lunged for the paper. Lucia let him take it. It was not a ledger. It was the note she had left with the ring. "I saw." Enzo stared at the words. Valentina made a small sound. Tommaso stepped from the shadow near the front door. His men appeared behind Enzo and Valentina, quiet as closing locks. Lucia did not look away from her sister. "I saw all of it," she said. "Not at once. Not quickly enough. But I saw." Valentina's face crumpled. "You always had everything." Lucia felt the old wound open, but this time it did not bleed the same way. "No, I had what I built." "You could have built something too." Enzo started speaking fast then, blaming Valentina, blaming Belandi, blaming pressure, money, fear, anything that might make him less small. Lucia listened for a moment, then turned away. That was the punishment he hated most. Not anger, not tears, the loss of audience. Tommaso's men took them out through the back. Valentina called Lucia's name once. Lucia closed her eyes, then opened them again. She did not answer. The city did what cities always do. It swallowed scandal, digested it, and turned it into stories told over coffee. The Calabrese alliance cracked. Dario disappeared into whatever private justice men like Tommaso gave to traitors. Belandi's name became dangerous to say in the wrong rooms. Enzo's family cut him loose before breakfast. Valentina left Rome for an aunt's house near the coast, where, according to Lucia's mother, she cried often and complained that no one understood her. Lucia did not visit, not because she hated her forever. Forever was too heavy to carry. She simply put the hurt down and chose not to pick it up every morning. Dolce Stella reopened 12 days after the night at Termini. The lock was replaced, the office painted, the filing cabinet removed and beaten with a hammer by Agata in the alley, which became Lucia's favorite memory of the repair process. Customers returned with flowers, gossip, apologies, and an appetite for anything filled with cream. Some came because they had heard rumors. Most stayed because Lucia's pastries were still better than anyone else's. A quiet Silvestri guard took up a position across the street, pretending to read newspapers. Another sat near the fountain each morning, with an espresso he never finished. Lucia told Tommaso his men were terrible actors. Tommaso said Rome had survived worse theater. He came every morning at 7:45. At first, He claimed it was for security updates, then business, then coffee, then because Agatha preferred Lucia's cornetti and had demanded he bring some back. Lucia let each lie live for one day before killing it with a look. He began sitting at the small corner table near the window, too large and dark for the cheerful room, reading messages, while children stared at him and old women pretended not to flirt. Lucia called him boss man when he became too serious. He called her impossible when she refused expensive gifts, unwanted guards inside the kitchen, and a new delivery van she did not need. "You like me impossible," she told him one morning, while dusting sugar over warm pastries. Tommaso looked up from his coffee. "I like you honest." She had no quick answer for that, so she threw a clean towel at him. He caught it, smiling. Spring softened Rome. Flowers returned to balconies. The shop door stayed open in the afternoons. Lucia laughed more easily, not because the hurt had vanished, but because it no longer owned every room inside her. Tommaso changed too, though he would have denied it if anyone but Lucia said so. His men noticed first. Agatha noticed before everyone. He began eating breakfast. He stopped taking calls during Lucia's busiest hour because she once told him nobody wanted the smell of murder near the almond cream. He learned the names of her regulars. He repaired the loose step near the back entrance himself, after Lucia accused him of looking at it like a problem he could buy. The first time he came into the kitchen and rolled dough badly, Lucia laughed so hard she had to sit down. He looked offended for almost a full minute, then tried again. On the morning he proposed, Lucia knew something was strange before he entered. The guard across the street wore a tie. Agatha appeared behind him carrying flowers and pretending they were for the counter. Tommaso arrived at 7:45 exactly, which should have been normal, except he was not holding his phone, and his face had the stillness it wore before difficult negotiations. Lucia narrowed her eyes. "What did you do?" He placed a white pastry box on the counter. "I brought breakfast. This is my bakery. I am aware." "You brought breakfast to a bakery?" "Yes." She looked at Agatha. Agatha looked at the ceiling. The guard across the street suddenly became fascinated by his newspaper. Lucia opened the box carefully. Inside was one perfect cannoli, filled with sweet ricotta and orange, dusted with powdered sugar. Beside it sat a simple gold ring. Not huge, not shouting. Beautiful because it looked like something meant to be worn every day, not displayed for strangers. Lucia stared at it. For a moment, she was back in the apartment hallway, looking at a different ring on a different hand, feeling the old life fall away beneath her feet. Tommaso seemed to understand because he did not speak at once. He waited until she looked up. "I know what a ring has already cost you," he said. "So I will not ask for obedience. I will not ask you to disappear into my house or my name. I will not ask you to become quieter, smaller, safer, or easier for me to protect. I am asking if you will keep choosing me and let me keep choosing you in whatever room you decide to stand in." Lucia's eyes burned. The shop had gone silent. Even the espresso machine seemed to be holding its breath. "That was very dramatic," she whispered. His mouth softened. "Yes. You hid a ring in a pastry box." "Also yes. After ruining my cannoli the night we met, I thought the circle was elegant." She laughed then, through tears she did not bother hiding. "You are ridiculous." "Is that a no?" Lucia picked up the ring. Her hands did not shake this time. "No, boss man," she said. "That is a yes." He kissed her across the counter while Rome woke outside, while sugar floated in the morning light, while Agatha cried into a napkin and denied it angrily, while the guard across the street finally gave up pretending to read. Lucia Verisi had once walked out of her old life with a note that said only I saw. She had seen betrayal. She had seen danger. She had seen the ugly truth beneath polished people and pretty promises, but she had also seen herself clearly at last. Not the woman Enzo had underestimated, not the sister Valentina had envied, not the soft, cheerful pastry chef people mistook for harmless. She was Lucia, warm and sharp, sweet and stubborn, frightened sometimes and brave anyway. And Tommaso Silvestri, the man enemies once believed she would weaken, stood beside her in the little shop she had rebuilt with her own hands, looking at her like she was not his weakness at all. She was the light in the window, the fire in the kitchen, the reason he came home from the dark. Together, they became the story Rome could not stop whispering about, the feared boss and the pastry chef who made him laugh, the dangerous man and the woman who never learned to tremble properly. The most unexpected power couple in the city, built not from fear or ownership, but from sugar, danger, trust, and a love that knew the difference between holding on and holding someone free.